All right, God bless everybody. Hope everybody's doing okay. We're going to talk a little bit more about topwater, but we're also going to include how a topwater, believe it or not, another bait that is very similar to it is jerkbait. And you say, wait a minute, there's no way. A topwater is on top of the water. A jerkbait could be anywhere from 4 foot under the water to 10 foot under the water. How can it be the same? How can you possibly compare the two? Well, it kind of surprised me one day when I realized it. But here's the thing. So when you're dealing with clear water, okay, and this is one of the things that we're covering, attacking clear water, trying to get clear water to where it doesn't intimidate me anymore. Been successful in clear water. How do I do this? A lot of people, what they're going to do is they're going to automatically tie jig on. They're going to go get a drop shot, a little shaky head. Nothing wrong with those things, okay? But what if I'm trying to cover water? And you say, well, crankbaits. So crankbaits are a little bit harder because you got to have a crankbait that's going to be pretty deep, if you're going, depending on how clear the water is. And we're talking about this technique right here that I'm telling you about has worked in probably 10 to 12 feet visibility in clear water, okay? And I've used it several times at Cumberland. I've also used it several times in a little lake about 30 minutes from me, okay? Not gonna mention the name of it just because it's a pretty small lake and it wouldn't take much for it to be pressured, but it also has a lot of clear water, okay? Cumberland's a little different story. Cumberland's a big old lake. I mean, you can put a lot of pressure on Cumberland, but it takes a lot of boats to do that, okay? Most days, except for this time of year, you're probably not going to be putting that much pressure on Cumberland. So we have the walking bait. This right here is a little walking bait by S&M Laurel River Custom. Haven't got a lot of time in with this bait yet, but it's the same concept of the baits that I throw most of the time. Usually I throw a Sammy 100 a lot, and this little bait right here, it mimics a dog X, and it walks very well. I'm very pleased with the way this bait walks, and I get a little more time on the water and able to go a little bit more. Lord willing, I'm going to put this right here to use a little bit more, especially this color. I really like this color. I tend to want a bait that has a little see-through to it, especially the clearer that water is. It just keeps those fish from getting a look at it. So what are we talking about? So if it's slick calm out, okay, then that's when I want to take this topwater right here. If it's slick calm, water temperature, I'm going to say 55 degrees up as high as you want to. This technique I've used so far, only because I haven't done it in anything below 55 degrees. I usually don't throw topwater when it gets that cold, the water gets that cold. But if you're going to have slick calm conditions, then my first grab is going to be this topwater. Why? Because it'll draw fish out 15, 20 feet deep. Okay, we talked about that in the last thing. You may have to change the cadence on it. You may have to walk it just a little bit slower. So in other words, you may have to, when you're walking this type of topwater, basically what you're doing is you're popping the slack in the line, which is making that bait dart side to side, okay? That's giving the impression to that fish that's looking from underneath, hey, that's an easy meal, I'm gonna go get it. Interestingly enough, what happened to me quite a few times, and then finally I woke up to it, is that it would get windy. Well, as it started to get windy, then of course, topwater wasn't as effective. They couldn't really see it real good. You could take a popper and throw it out there and pop it a couple times. But I'm gonna tell you something that really surprised me, is that of course my first reaction was I'm gonna pick up a spinnerbait, throw a crankbait, throw something else that I can feel, and I'll get better bites. Because now I've got something that I can keep in contact with, okay? But I wasn't as successful as I was earlier that day when I was throwing this topwater, because that's what they wanted, especially this time of year in the fall. What they want is they want that easy shad. That's what they're feeding on. They want that easy shad to look at and go grab, okay? And actually I figured this out in the middle of summer. It wasn't in the fall. What I did was, I realized in my mind, I said, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm not gonna throw a topwater because I don't feel like they can really seal or feel what's going on. I throw this crankbait for an hour or two and I haven't gotten a bite yet. I still feel like those fish are biting. They ought to be biting even more because it's stirring everything up now. Now they definitely should be biting. So what am I going to do? Well, little did I know what I needed to do was start throwing a jerkbait. Jerkbait has been one of the, and we're talking about one of these hard jerkbaits. Jerkbait has been one of those baits that I love throwing because I feel like fish see this bait the exact same way. They see it as an opportunity to feed because they see something go right to left, twitch back and forth, and they also see it as an easy meal because something's wrong with it. Little did I realize that the action that this has underwater is the exact same action that your topwater has on top of the water. So it still is appealing to the same fish. It still is appealing to that same feeding style. So as simple as it is, you would take, now of course the biggest issue between the two, okay, is that this right here, you can use fluorocarbon line because it sinks. Depending on the jerkbait that you're throwing, this is also, this is one that S&M's Laurel River Custom painted for me. I like this specific color because especially when you get a lot of that wind, you got a lot of those waves moving around, you got that cloudy condition, I want something that pretty much sticks out like a light bulb. I want something that, yes, they got all kinds of little minnows and everything in there, but I want them to see it, okay? Now, there's going to be opportunities where I may see a log or I may see something and there's no wind. Does that mean that I only throw a jerkbait in the wind? No, I'll also throw a jerkbait sometimes when there's no wind. The difference is I'm going to throw more of a color, and this right here is a Mega Bass 110. It's a +1. I'm going to throw this little bait right here. You see it's clear, and it has a little bit of chartreuse at the end, but not much, but it's mostly clear. I'm going to throw this bait when it's calm and there's not a lot of wind. Sometimes that bait hovering 6-7 feet down is as far as the fish wants to come up, and that's something that you're going to have to determine, okay? A lot of times those fish in the morning, a lot of times you hear people say a lot, well, anytime you throw topwater, you need to have a backup bait. You need to have a Cinco or something, plastic worm or something you can throw out there in case they come up and just swipe at it. I'm going to tell you something else that's very helpful that what you can do. Have you another rod tied up on a jerkbait. And whenever that fish comes after that bait right there and it misses it, set that topwater down and pick up that jerkbait, throw it right back in the same place and work it and twitch it just once or twice and let it sit there. You might be surprised that fish come up and nail this bait right here. Why? Because it has the same profile of that minnow and it has the same action. So it looks like a bait, any type of little bait fish that got smacked. It looks like a shad that got stunned because it moves that erratic little twitch to it. Especially these little Mega Bass right here. Because of the way that they dart just every which way, okay? Most jerk baits, like this one right here that I have, this one from S&M Laurel River Custom, this bait right here, when you twitch it, it'll go left and it'll go right, just like that topwater. The difference in that Mega Bass 110 is it'll go left and right, it'll go up, it'll go down, it'll twitch, it goes every which direction. I believe that's why one of those baits, one of the reasons why it's so successful. Now, we'll talk about it in another one, but I changed the hooks on it just a little bit so that I can get just that slow little sink out of the bait, because especially where we're coming up in the wintertime, it seems to be something that happens a lot. Now, I have some of them that all I have to do is just change the hooks out, and then it's going to be that floating up a little bit. But if I put these little hooks on here, this sinks it down just a little bit, and it seems to be in the wintertime especially, that's what they want. This one here, I just have just regular hooks on it, and it tends to, it's going to go down and twitch, but it's going to come up just a hair. There's certain situations that I want that. But next time you go out and it's a cloudy day and you're sitting here telling yourself, man, I was catching them real good on that top water, now the wind's picked up and now I can't get a bite. Seems like they can't see the bait. I'm just going to switch over to a crankbait, or I'm just going to switch over to spinnerbait. You can do that if you want to. My suggestion, switch to jerkbait. Still has the same action as that walking on top. It's just under the water just a little bit. You just might be surprised how many fish and what fish you wind up catching on that jerkbait. A lot of times people are like, oh, well, fishing that jerkbait, where's my shoulder out? I'm gonna tell you something what that has to do with, okay? A lot of people aren't gonna talk about this, but it's the truth, okay? I love throwing, one of the jerkbaits that I love throwing the most when I was a kid, because it was about the only minnow bait we really had, okay? We had the Smithwick Rogue and we had the Rapella. Well, the Smithwick Rogue, I didn't do very good with when I was growing up as a kid. What we always used was the Rapella. That's the one I associated the most with, okay? The only problem with the Rapella is it would twitch down and that Rapella would float back up, and that's about all it did, is just twitched. You could twitch it on the surface like a topwater and get absolutely obliterated, okay? But it wasn't very good about a side-to-side action. But then as I started going through the years, I really missed and liked that twitching action of those jerkbaits. So I got some Lucky Craft Pointer 100s. Those jerkbaits twitch from left to right. But the difference was $20 a piece back then. So as much as I liked them, I was trying to find something that I could have a handful of them, because as a friend of mine says, I'm hard on equipment. So I tend to throw things as close to trees and as close to rocks and everything, and if it breaks, then it breaks. To me, I'm trying to get the bait where I want it to be. So as I'm practicing and throwing, there's times that I break baits. Okay, it's not the bait's fault. A lot of times it's my fault. Most of the time, let's be honest, it's my fault. So I tried that. I tried to find me a different alternative. Well, I found one. That different alternative was KVD, that Strike King jerkbait. About $10 a piece, not too bad. You could pick one up every paycheck, and eventually after 4 or 5 paychecks, you'd have 4 or 5 in your box, and there you go. The problem with that jerkbait, and I caught a lot of fish on that jerkbait. The problem with that jerkbait is that jerkbait was wearing my arm out. The reason it was wearing my arm out is because of the way the bill was made on that bait. It has a downward angle and it's wider, and it has a thick bill. Now that means that that bill's going to be on there pretty good, and it's not going to be hard on, you know, it takes a beating pretty good when you're banging it on stuff or casting it or whatever. The problem is when you go to jerk that bait or twitch that bait, I used to think it was the rods and everything else, but it's not. It takes force to work it. Okay, so it takes a little bit of extra effort to make that bait to go right. So what the water does is it comes down and it pushes on that lip, and as it pushes on that lip, it forces that bait to go right, or it forces that bait to go left. That's a good thing about that jerkbait, okay? But the problem is that after doing that for several hours a day, wears on a man's shoulder, okay? So you've had to overwork. You think about a topwater. When you throw a topwater out and you're popping the slag on the topwater, it really doesn't do that much problems to your shoulder because you're just walking that bait on top. Now, if you start working something like a popper, now as you pull it, and eventually you've been working a lot with the popper, so that popper is going to work you and wear you out just a little bit, okay? Now, the difference in the jerkbaits, when you take a jerkbait like this one right here, it's a little bit wider, and you can tell this one right here, this is this Mega Bass 110 plus 1. these baits aren't the same. This one's a little bit wider than this one is. And this one has good action. But this bait right here does have a little more water resistance in it than the one next to you. You say, well, I don't understand why that's a big deal. Well, this is going to displace a little more water, but it's also going to be a little bit more of a challenge to work. So nothing wrong with it, that's just how it's going to be. The Megabass 110, especially the plus one, and I've got the other one over here too. I'll show you. Got one of these shallow ones right here. Because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have two different jerkbaits tied on. I'll have a shallow one. This is the shallow Megabass 110. This is the one everybody pretty much uses, okay? The lip on this, you can see it's different than most jerkbaits. Now, the bad thing is these are notorious for busting this lip right here. I do have to be a little bit extra careful when I cast this, especially in the winter. A buddy of mine went one winter and went with me. First time he threw his right on the rock. It was in the middle, it was real cold, busted the lip as soon as it did it, so happens. You have to be real careful when you throw them. But because of that lighter lip, because of that smaller and thinner lip, okay, that flexes just a little bit, it doesn't have as much, it doesn't take as much effort to twitch this bait. So in other words, this jerkbait alone is easier to twitch, easier on a man's shoulders. I can twitch this most of the day and it doesn't bother my shoulder. Same thing with this plus one. It's narrow enough and the bill is narrow enough that it doesn't hurt my shoulder as much. It is exactly like working. It takes just as much effort as working this right here most of the day. And you know as well as I do, if they're biting it, it gives you extra push all day long to use it. But anyway, this is just my take, because a lot of times we get to where we think, well, I just need to get me a new rod because that rod's going to help me with that jerkbait. Well, it does, and I'm blessed to have pretty nice rods. Especially I spent just a little bit more because I really like throwing topwater and I really like throwing the jerkbait. And when I realized that I could use the same setup for both of them, then I was blessed to have two rods. One I could put a jerkbait on and one I could put a topwater on, and a lot of days this is what I go fishing with. Other than my other baits that I have, of course, but especially this time of year, these two baits right here become a big playing factor, because you better have a topwater tied on this time of year in the fall, because you never know when those schooling fish are going to pop up out of nowhere, or you're going to all of a sudden come into a slick, calm day. But I'm going to tell you right now, you better have your jerkbait tied on, because if that wind picks up and that topwater is not working anymore, don't think for a second that those fish stop feeding just because it got windy. What you need to do is you need to pick up that jerkbait, throw it right back in those same points and those same places that you've been throwing, because they'll come out and they'll nail this jerkbait, because that's what they're feeding on. They're doing one thing this time of year. They're feeding and they're getting ready for winter because they know it's coming. Okay? Anyway, hope this helps. Hope these little tips kind of give you an idea. Hope what we've talked about, the jerkbait, you'll understand it a little bit more now. A lot of times too, cover one little thing I guess before I let you go. You can use a real soft rod on a jerkbait if you want to, but you're not going to get the same snap. Okay? If you'll look into, and you don't have to buy one, but just so you get an idea, the rods that I use are a IMX Pro. It's a jerkbait rod. It's rated for 1/4 ounce to 3/8 ounce, 8-pound line to 15-pound line. Okay, it's made specifically. G Loomis made them specifically for jerkbaits. If you'll go to a bait shop somewhere and just ask them, say, hey, do you have one of these jerkbait rods? I want to kind of see the action. You'll see, still has a parabolic action, but it has a little more backbone than a lot of your typical jerkbait rods or topwater baits have. what that helps me with is I don't have to put as much action into my twitching. A lot of times if your rod is too soft, you'll have to overexert your shoulder in order to make that bait twitch when you're popping it on the slack. I don't have to do that. It saved my shoulder and saved myself a lot of aggravation throughout the day. Same thing with my topwater. It's perfect. It's 6'9". I'm not saying you have to have G-Luminous. I'm not saying you even have to have these rods. I'm just saying, if you want an idea of the type of action it takes, go look these rods up, go to a bait shop or tackle shop, look them up and say, hey, that's interesting, that's different. It may be the same type of setup you use. If it is, it's awesome. Maybe you have a different setup that you use, it's your favorite. You want to put it in the comments below, that's fine. If you want a different setup, that's fine. If you have a different jerkbait that you like, different topwaters, whatever it is, that's fine. This is just my take, my little bit of advice on this is what I do. This is just something that, especially in the fall, this is what I try to do because it's a 1-2 punch for me and usually puts fish in the boat. Anyway, thank you all for supporting me, and thank you for the encouragement that everybody sends. God bless you all. I hope you do. I hope you all have fun this fall as you're fishing. Above all, don't forget, Jesus loves you. Y'all have a great day.